The following episode was recorded at Banff Session 2026, which is celebrating 70 years of architects and interior designers coming together to share ideas, culture, strategy, and this year's theme was origin stories. In this episode, I'm joined by Daniel Baumann. He's the principal and design lead of Henning Larsen in New York. He holds a bachelor's degree from the Royal Danish Academy in Copenhagen and a master's of architecture at Bartlett at UCL. And he also studied at California College of Arts in San Francisco. Daniel's project experience spans mixed-use districts, civic buildings, and campus developments across North America and Europe. I'm your host, Kelso Brennan, and I'm genuinely curious about strategy, business, architecture, design, and talking with the people behind big, bold ideas. Thank you very much for being here, Daniel. How did the morning session go?
Yeah, it went really well. It's always that thing of speaking to a large crowd of people. It's very fun. But I thought this was actually a really great opportunity just to do a little bit of reflection.
That's great. It's a perfect spot in the national park and the mountains. I feel like especially if you get some alone time and just listen to the trees rustle a little bit with the wind. And what are you reflecting on when you're here?
Well, I mean, many different things. I first came here, I was just telling you this before, when I was a kid. And in many ways, coming back here is also a little bit like revisiting the last 15 years of your life and your professional career in many ways. And the theme really was an opportunity to think about that. It's like sometimes I've been with the same practice for almost my entire career, and sometimes it's difficult to figure out where you end and the practice begins, and the themes that you perhaps were interested in once, and then how that blends together with what you're actually doing now. So it was a really nice opportunity just to think that through a little bit and reflect.
Was there any aha moments that came out of it? Are you willing to share?
Yeah, I mean, just on a very personal level, over the year, I was a super nerdy kid as a kid, and owning that nerdiness, I think, has been nice. the real sort of prolifery of who you become over time. I used to draw a lot, and I was really nerdily interested in ocean liners from the early 20th century.
Okay.
And I didn't realize, I was very embarrassed about it and I wouldn't share that with anyone. But I think when I look back at it now, the reason I thought that was interesting was because it was such a, that at that time, it was a piece of mechanics. It was this frontier of technology.
No doubt.
But then there were really, the interior decoration of it was put in together as these compartmentalized period interiors that was really telling a story.
Everybody always puts so much detail into it back then too, yeah.
And so in a way, when I think about it backward now, I think that sort of idea of experiential, the sequential, the narrative, the storytelling of architecture, I think that really has followed me through my entire career.
What did your parents do for a living that also might have influenced you to go down this road?
Well, to be fair, my mom is a nurse and my dad is an engineer, and he was always rallying against architects in his everyday profession. Okay. So I think it was more the other way around, that I was always so passionately interested in spaces and exploring buildings and that stuff. And he was very much a man of this is how we're going to resolve it in the best possible way.
It's essentially solutions through methodical methods in some sense.
For sure.
And then I guess from the nursing side, it's a bit more compassion and people-focused, of course. So it could be a nice blend of both of those. I was wondering, you've had a tremendous career already, and still quite young, obviously. And
so young.
Yeah, well, it's true. I feel like today the 40s and the 50s are you still just feel like you're getting started. I'm just
I hope that's true.
I just went past my 40th birthday. I'm 41 now, so I feel like I'm just getting a hang of things. And so that was actually part of my question to you, is when in your career did you feel like you were, I'll call it, studying to become an architect versus you were one, or you found this defining moment of your career?
To be honest, there's still times where I wake up and I can't believe that I am an architect.
Right.
I feel like I'm still, I think that's what's so difficult about this profession, is that you're never finished learning. There's no point where you can say well, I am really proliferating at everything now. But I definitely had the realization when I graduated my master's that there was sort of a sense of foundation that had been laid. But then when you start practice, you realize that in fact, there's so many things you don't know, and you almost have to learn it all over again. And you curse your background, your education for not having given you all the tools you needed. Or
And of course, it never could, right?
no,
Like, it never
yeah,
could. Would you ever see yourself potentially at some point going down the academic road of training and educating others?
I did actually. I taught in Copenhagen for 5 years.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know that. That's fantastic. Look at
No,
this is where this leads us on these types of conversations.
yeah. No, I did. Like, I really enjoyed it, but I also think it brought me down. Like, I had a burnout at some point because I was practicing and I was actually as teaching at the same time. I was teaching studio. I was always feel like I was underperforming in both capacities.
So split focus, and you're kind of straddling over two areas that
Yeah,
you get wider and wider apart, and you just can't
yeah.
eventually make
But
it.
it was a really enlightening moment of just like also knowing how to put boundaries for yourself and like knowing when to stop
Yeah.
somehow. It
And
was
so, there's a lot of discussion about boundaries, especially in a very connected world with devices and whatnot. How do you set boundaries for yourself as well as boundaries on the other people that you're working with? Is there like times of day, or there's like your shut off moment where you can, say I'm off the clock, or is your mind always going on the work that you do?
I mean, I think I find it very difficult, for instance, to have a hobby because, in a way, and I'm lucky and also unfortunate in the way that my job is my hobby in many ways. Like, architecture is my hobby to begin with, and it still is. But I find it very important to have a work life balance. I really try to leave at 6 and I try to communicate that there is not an expectation in the studio that you're there after 6. Sometimes you have deadlines and you have to make things work. But that there is an expectation that, we need to do the job that we're able to do within a 40-hour work week so that you can switch that off. And I find that it's one of the things about architecture that I like the least is this like melting together of yourself with the
It's
output,
true.
right?
Yeah.
That there's no boundaries and it becomes so ingrained. And I work with myself to try to not get too like, that it becomes too personal in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a daily task.
That's right, yeah. And so you're in New York now,
Hmm.
and what about the journey to get there? Because obviously you've went, from, well, I say all over. Give me maybe a bit of history about some of the places that you've worked and lived.
Yeah, I mean, I went abroad for the first time during my undergrad. I did a 6 month sort of exchange program in San Francisco, which was sort of my big eye-opening experience of going abroad. And after that, I really didn't want to stay in Copenhagen. I was really enticed by the big city, and so I did a master's in London at the Bartlett, which was great. It was also in many ways a formative, horrifying experience because it was so bad. Um,
What was bad about it when they like, what was the downsides or difficulties
It
there?
was so extremely stressful,
Really? Okay.
in a very not great. I had the best friendships of my life were formed there. It was very supportive in terms of the students, but I definitely felt like it was a very destructive educational culture where you always felt like you were the worst person to ever
Oh,
enter the
interesting.
halls and had to try to make up for that
Yeah.
somehow. But from there, like I came out of that having learned a lot. Um, but I will not. I would be very hesitant to sort of say it was a great experience. I mean, it equipped me really well, I have
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah.
but it was also very hard.
Understood. Yeah. Yeah. I can sympathize with that with some of the education that I've had throughout my career, and I've done a master's as well, not in architecture, but it's it pushes you to certain limits. There's some famous YouTube video that I remember watching that said if lobsters had psychiatrists, they would never grow, and so their shell is created by pressure. So they sort of got to get out of this and start to grow from
Right.
this,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
so and you get hardened as well through this process, and then you also need to shed to become vulnerable at some point. And so if you were prescribed medication to take care of that always, you would just stay in the same place.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I really liked that saying. If you were to look back when you first graduated from your master's program, what did that feel like in terms of, I guess, your next stepping stone for your career? Like, what did you feel like when you finished that accomplishment?
Um, Terror, I would
Terror. Yeah,
say.
I was gonna say a little bit of
Fear.
fear, right? Of
Yeah.
course, like
There was
you don't know
fear.
what to do from
Yeah.
here.
I remember that so vividly, the sort of the sense of something ending, and you had to start something new, right? Your every education had been, I mean, you were in the system for 6 years, and you sort of knew how that worked, and then you had to sort of start over again. It was from a very luxurious point stressful.
For sure.
And then I mean, I graduated in 2010, and the market was not good for
Right.
design. I was lucky enough to get a job with a large firm in London with Foster and Partners, and that was also formative in many ways. It was extremely stressful, so it felt like continuing the same, journey.
Well, I think you probably have a lot of ambition at this time too. And when you first, start out from there, you're trying to prove yourself, and so you tend to take on more than you can chew in some cases in those settings. I can see that you're very passionate. Obviously, you care about this a lot. And are there any favorite projects that stand out in your mind throughout your career that were really your kind of staple that you would go back to and say, I just absolutely love this project with passion?
I think it's always the sort of game that the next project becomes your favorite project because
Oh,
it's
good.
like it's the
Yes.
one that's fresh in your mind. But if I sort of this gave me an opportunity. The lecture that we're just giving today was really an opportunity to sort of reflect back on it. And I actually think the project that I'm the most proud of is the one that is maybe the least important. And
Interesting.
it's a project that I also showed today, which is it's a water treatment plant, and it's a project that sort of lived a life that was very sort of like, people weren't as excited about it as they were about the museum or
Of course.
the big sort of flashy project, but it was one where we actually managed to give it the same love and care as
Yeah.
you would to a museum.
That's amazing, actually, because you think about that. And water treatment, of course, what would be more essential to life than that? But I love that you mentioned that as one of your favorite. What elements of that project did you love the most about it? We'll call it maybe why would you become more passionate about this one over some others?
I think it was this fact that we managed to, in that project, love it as much as we would a museum or a library. And so we managed to insert and make it like it was a really back of house function, right? It's a piece of utility, but we managed to sort of like separate it enough so it becomes a public space so that you can go all the way up close to it. You can see how the processes are laid out. It has a texture and a materiality that is unusual, I think, for projects like that.
Yeah.
And it's like it's something that it's utilitarian, but it has well designed, and it sort of invites you to participate or observe
Yeah.
or just to see it. And I love that.
I love that you shared that today, and with a great group of architects and interior designers, and certainly it will spark them to think about something that they may take as mundane as a new opportunity to see it in a completely different light and treat it differently. Water treatment, of course, they use their word again. But I wanted to go back to a point that you mentioned where from Copenhagen, for instance, and then wanting to experience something different, you went to San Francisco, and then you became sort of fixated with the bigger city, which often I feel like is somewhat the opposite for those that have grown up in larger cities. I've always been in North America, and I think of Copenhagen as like sort of a dream destination as the alternative, and that would be a goal of mine to be exiting a large city to go on. Tell me a bit more about that. What enticed you to the city?
Yeah, it's a good question. Like, my mother is German, and so I always had that thing of going or I would go in the summers, I'd go visit my grandparents. So there was always this it felt very natural to sort of transition between different places and different cultures. And what I think I really loved is I love cities.
This episode is supported by High Signs. I know not everybody likes commercials, but I do want to make a note that as the managing director of High Signs, we're here to help support architects and interior designers. And I've been fortunate to work on projects in Reykjavik, Iceland, Hawaii, Montana, Banff, Jasper, Calgary, Edmonton, and beyond. We like to focus on placemaking, wayfinding, and architectural signage. Our design team help with sign planning, content schedules, mapping, engineering, fabrication, and installation. Whether it's a public art installation or campus wayfinding, we're here to help. High Signs. Let's build something great together.
I love cities in a sense, and exploring cities and the energy that there is in cities. And so London was like a first step. I always had a really affection for Berlin. And then when we opened up the office in the US and I went to North America, we actually started working in Canada first, but then we started doing work in the US and opened up an office in New York. And New York, I had never really been interested. I went for the first time in 2016 and it was just mind blown.
It is. It's a busy place. I've been as well, and it's just
It's stressful.
it's
in New
stressful.
York.
Yes, yeah. There's some amount of the stress does come from the people, but
Yeah.
the decision points even.
Yeah.
Not sure when to cross a street. Sometimes it even feels dangerous to some degree, not from the sake of the people, but the pedestrians and the traffic of the vehicles. Like I was in New York, and one thing I'll share is I was trying to take a photo. This is before my camera days. I actually do like have a traditional 35 millimeter cameras, but it was a fixed lens and I couldn't get what I was trying to get in it. And my friend was in the shot. And so I stepped back and bumped into somebody. And of course, being Canadian, I said, "Oh, sorry." And the person stopped and said, "Don't ever walk in front of me when I'm walking again."
Oh,
I was thinking
wow.
like, I'm never going to see you again. But it just gave me the sense of New York, like, oh, I'm in a different place.
Well, but that's the thing is like, I mean, it can come across like that in the beginning, and New Yorkers have a bad reputation for being rude. But I think if you get beyond it somehow, there's a lot of warmth and empathy. And the thing I think I singly love the most is the people.
Yeah.
The people come from all over.
Right.
It's really a melting pot of different people,
Of
different
course, a
cultures.
major immigration hub early on. And
Yeah, and I think but there's people a certain openness
Yeah.
to new things, but also it's sort of this. It is a city that really caters to the nervous overachievers, right? Everyone really wants
Sure.
to do
Yeah.
well and succeed. And there's something about that energy that I have to say that I like if you come at it from a perspective of saying, like, I'm excited about this.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. Because
Absolutely.
people that you work with are great at what they're doing.
Yeah, that's
and
great.
Interesting things happen in that intersection.
Yeah, that's a good point. Very good point. So you've been in some very interesting cities. London, for instance, I think of that as windy roads, crazy curves and streets. And, there was a large, disastrous fire in 1666. It burned down majority of London. And at that time, it was a lot of like wood and shanties. And this is a developing city at the time. When they decided to rebuild, they had an opportunity to do something a bit more like Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, where the streets are a lot more sort of the Quaker style has created a bit more of a very equal system of streets and lines. And when they did rebuild, they rebuilt with brick and stone, and then they decided to try to make something that would last, which was such a fortunate thing because, of course, now hundreds of years later, a lot of those properties still stand and remain. I find New York and some of its city street lines, aside from Central Park and those kind of places, it does have some very difficult intersections and weird property lines, but it creates an opportunity to put something there that's very unique because you've got a pointed, property line, and then you can create a very unique structure. What do you think of when you see that kind of architecture in London versus New York? Are there any similarities in those
Interesting.
areas?
Yeah. I lived in different places also. I spent a year in Munich at some point when we opened up a studio there. I was in the Middle East in Riyadh for like 8 months. So I feel like I've had the pleasure or the privilege of seeing and living in very different urban environments.
Right.
And so when I got to New York, I did this thing where over a series of weekends, I tried to walk the grid. So you start at Battery Park, and then I would just zigzag my way through
Okay, yeah.
the entire urban grid from side to side. And what is so interesting about it, I actually don't think urbanistically it's a great city. Like in terms of urban spaces, it's
Right.
really, the grid is relentless, right? It just keeps
Yeah,
on
it's the
going.
same thing over and over
But
to
what's
some degree.
exciting is that the uniformity of that grid produces architecture that is so wildly different.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the things that I actually enjoyed. And what I saw on that trip is that the grid responds so super differently to urban conditions, what the soil conditions are like below, right? Can you build super
Right.
tall? Can you not build tall? What kind of community is there? And it's just like, it's kind of interesting to observe. And then also, it doesn't really relate to any sort of basis urbanism principles, right? Like in Northern Europe, we have like a street to building ratio. So there's daylight in streets and stuff. And none of that sort of competes. And it's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It is. I've always found it fascinating. And I don't have as much of a design mind, although I have an appreciation for it. So I appreciate you sharing that aspect of it. I was looking at a part of your bio as well and seeing the role that you're in. And when I think about design, the creative aspect, and then also the aspects of running the business to that degree, how do you keep those separate? Or do you find that as you've sort of elevated in your position and your stature of your own career, are you competing with the business aspect and have less time for design, or do you really prioritize the design aspect of your career?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's different answers to that. I think the biggest thing that has changed as I've had more responsibility is the responsibility for other people in a way,
Yes, exactly.
and being sort of responsible for bringing in the work, for instance,
Yeah,
and keeping the machine going in a sense, and then having to deal with the real conflicts of negotiating a fee that supports the amount of time that we need to spend on the project, and feeling that in some ways I am a I went to art school, like I learned how to like draw and like use tools that I no longer use that much. I do most of my designing through sketching, through conversation, through like engaging with other people.
yeah.
And it's very rare that I have the opportunity to spend more than a couple of hours drawing something out.
Of course, but you provide the mentorship, which leads to the design in that
Well,
sense
yeah,
too.
you just start understanding that design happens in many different ways, right?
Yeah.
But so to answer your questions, I somehow feel that I, my work life is very torn into two things, right? It's like doing a lot of things now. And I don't find myself being a natural multitasker. So it takes a lot of energy to find out how to actually stop and go
Right.
in so
Yeah.
many different ways.
Sort of that divide that we were talking about earlier with, straddling two worlds. I always find that to be a challenge. And although some people absolutely love the aspect of the people and the business and the development of those people, and it's there's a special place for people that do mentor and do find that the greatest thing that they could build isn't necessarily the built environment or the structure, but the people of who they're working with. And I've worked with a lot of people over my career, and you can typically see someone who is very vested in the project itself, and then there's those that are very call it like EQ. Their social aspect of the human is so in tune that they get the best out of people. And I think that you need a bit of both, of course. It is hard to be that person to be in between both. I'm on the business side of things as a managing director. I feel as though I tend to do more of the business aspect, sort of that you mentioned, managing the people, and less on the creative side. But I ran into a gentleman, and he was an executive in a marketing position, and I asked him where he'd worked for some large firms like Coca-Cola Classic, and he said, I'm a designer. And I said, oh, what software do you use typically? I was asking her a question. He says, software. He said, oh, no, I don't design. But he said, I love what I put out. I know what my taste is, sort of Rick Rubin in music, if you like this. He said, I don't play any instruments, but I am a designer because in the end, I'm influencing what the outcome is. I thought that was a very interesting way of thinking of yourself as a
It's
designer.
very true.
Yeah.
That's very true, though. I think that's, I still think for me, like the basis is the work, the buildings and the design and the urban environments that we're creating. It is sort of the thing that everything funnels into. But I can see that the thing that really gives me energy is my team and the conversations that we have within the team. And I think that's one thing that I can really see that I just leave a review or a conversation really energized from is when I can see that an idea travels, right? Like when someone says something that I pick up, we start discussing it. Next time, someone else has really thought about that and developed something on it. And there's just this notion of jamming collectively on a direction. And once the building is finished, you can't really see where it came from. Where, of course, people have been shaping different elements of it, but it's this collective spirit of the team as a
It is,
representative.
yeah, and
That's
it's
so
amazing to
exciting.
see those outcomes, and especially when you feel like every single person that worked on that project was rowing in the same direction.
Yeah.
You can always tell when one paddle is flipped to the other way and rowing against the team, but when you get something like that together, it's such a beautiful thing. I was going to ask if throughout your career, if there's any quotes or mottos that have always stuck with you that you'd come back to, with a catchphrase or some quotes that you tend to come back to? Anything that comes to mind?
Well, I'm a nervous overachiever myself, and I keep coming back to something that my grandma used to say, which is like, if you do your best, no one can ask you to do more. And it's something that I try to calm myself down with when I'm sitting and have to sort of peak perform or something, or like we didn't get that project that we really wanted. And I try to tell myself, well, if we really have done everything, then we can't really be asked to do more. And I try to tell it also to, sometimes on projects, but something happens, it's beyond your control, and it's not necessarily anyone's fault. You can't really point a finger at this just happened, and we did our best to manage it, and we've done the best we could.
That's so good. I love too that when I ask about that, you pick something from your grandmother and something that's personal and true. And I love when I don't ask those questions in advance so that people have time to prepare those. It's like that comes truly from the heart. So
Right.
I appreciate that so much. Last thing I'll ask, if you were to give yourself advice, say 15 years earlier, what would you say to your younger self?
Give yourself time. Like I think the thing that I'm sensing also when we hire graduates in the studio, there's an eagerness and a sort of a fire to do everything fast and do it all at once, and you want to progress and you want to succeed. And I think the thing that we have the least of in our current day and time and in our profession is time. And so if I were to do this again, I would really not push so hard on getting promoted.
Okay,
I
yeah.
would spend more time in that project team. I would just take it real chill, and I would just like spend more time just being happy doing one project and really investing in that. Because what I find is that the more harder you push, the more complex things become. It becomes more and more difficult, which is exciting, but there's an ease to giving yourself the time to explore and dabble and make mistakes and do those mistakes over and over again until you feel better. And that's the foundation that you rest upon. So I would tell myself, chill the fuck out. Like, just you'll get there, but like, don't push so hard. Give
That's
yourself
smart.
time.
And coming from someone who's achieved so much in their career already, that says a lot. So, that's great advice. Of course, you might give to yourself, but it's good advice for so many people that might listen to this podcast as well. And I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. You seem so very calm, honestly, for someone who's, as you mentioned, you're nervous and anxious, and you're a performer and you love to excel. You had a very chill aspect of
Well,
yourself.
thank
So
you. I appreciate that.
thank you very much for coming today, and I hope you enjoy the mountains over the next couple of days.
I will for sure.
Yeah, take your time.
All right. Thank you so much.